everyone, and welcome to this issue of Anti-Life Reviews. I am your new god, the Tony Makaya, and we are back today to finish up the month of January, where I've been looking at comics based on things that make me nostalgic. Now I'm going to conclude with what might be the best of the month, though that isn't exactly an impressive feat, to be honest with you. But I'm going to go over a comic published by Marvel Comics from December 1995 to February 1996. It is the 3-issue mini-series about one Earthworm Jim. So go ahead and hit subscribe, and let's get on your pocket rocket, and let's get groovy. The writer on this book is one Dan Slott, a big name on this, though not really at the time was he anyone of note. He did work on some IPs, I recall reading them, like his Ren and Stimpy Show comics, Pinky and the Brain, etc. Beyond that, honestly, I've never been the biggest fan of Dan, as a lot of important and notable works he did in his career have been on Spider-Man, and sure, I like Spider-Man fine, as much as anyone else, but I've never been a regular Spider-Man reader, so I generally did not read his Spider-Man, and obviously still don't. Still, Dan is fine. I guess he seems to have fallen into modern comic book writer syndrome, where he thinks he is more important than the work, and it affects his quality. That's neither here nor there. A competent name, to say the least, for goddamn Earthworm Jim. Artist on this is one Barry Crane, someone who I was not really familiar with, but whose art I really like. And looking into his career, I can see why. He worked on Marvel Comics Presents, which is always a series I loved. Such a sucker for anthology comics and shows. He worked on Conan, but really he also worked on the Venture Brothers, one of the greatest cartoons of all time, top 5 to say the least. I do have the more recent Earthworm Jim comics, both Launch the Cow and Fight the Fish by Doug Tadnapal, who helped create Earthworm Jim, the Neverhood, Skull Monkeys, among other things. I'm not going to get into Doug as a person, that's not what these reviews are about, but if someone wants to hear me review those ones, please let me know down below. Moving over to the issues themselves, we come upon Evil the Cat, Dark Lord of the Planet Heck, and he's being visited by other ne'er-do-wells, including Major Mucus, Doc Duodenum, Queen Pulsating, Bloating, Festering, Pus-Filled, Malformed, Slug for a Butt, amongst others. And they all have one problem, our hero, Earthworm Jim. And they want to hire Evil and his endless horde of lawyers to sue him for his continued harassment and assault of them. He agrees after a fee is discussed. This leads to us to meet the aforementioned earthworm named Jim, who, if you're unfamiliar with, is a not-so-humble earthworm who found a super-mechanized suit and got into it, turning it into something of a hero. He is going on a first date with a beautiful bug woman, Princess What's-Her-Name, and they go cow-tipping, but they aren't alone, as muscle-bound cat henchmen have disguised themselves as the cows, with villains Psy-Crow and Professor Monkey for a head leading the way. Jim and the princess manage to take out the cats disguised as cows and Psy-Crow, but the professor drugs them and kidnaps them. Jim is separated from his suit, which said suit goes about doing all manner of Looney Tune nonsense, and the princess is held captive by a goldfish named Bob, taken to his planet, and he is going to force a marriage on her, on threat of killing Jim. But unbeknownst to her, Jim escapes with his suit, pal Peter Puppy, and they flee to go help the princess. Meanwhile, she is coping with the whole forced marriage thing, dealing with her sister, the previously mentioned Queen Slug for a Butt, and someone puts explosives in her bouquet. The ceremony starts, and after Jim's general stupidity and getting lost, he swings in to save the princess, battles Bob, who has his own mech suit, though Jim just breaks his fishbowl. The bomb in the bouquet goes off, and the heroes escape. The evil lawyers arrive while the group is leaving. They are too busy chasing ambulances, taking the injured away from the scene, and are rendered useless. Of course, Jim is an idiot and gets them lost again. Ultimately, he ends up on Peter's home, where we learn that Peter, if he feels any kind of extreme emotion, turns into a Hulk-like being. This leads to them fighting what looks like Devil Dinosaur. Jim is thrashed. The princess puts on the super suit, beats the dinosaur, returns the suit to her man, Jim, and they live happily ever after, with Peter in tow. Or do they? While living comfortably, Evil the Cat, tired of his lawyer's handling of the situation, tries to kill Jim himself, and is eaten by Peter Puppy. Lastly, Jim wonders what happened to the crows from the beginning of the first issue, since they were replaced by the villains. And in the best thing I've seen from a Doctor Who episode in years, the cows explode out of a nearby phone booth, landing everywhere. Now let's talk about this. You may have noticed I described more of the story than I usually do. Because it was busy, it was frantic. They didn't stop from page 1, and that's a good thing. They did try to jam every single villain they could as rapidly as possible, when really Evil and Bob are the only bad guys worth note. I'll mention editorial notes shortly, but I think this was one of them. The second game had just came out a month before this comic did, but frankly, neither of the Jim games really fleshed out his character, besides being sort of a crazed, violent worm thrown to these strange landscapes. And actually, that is mentioned in this comic, with the princess saying that Jim's brave and bizarre exploits are celebrated throughout the cosmos. But really, it drew heavily from the cartoon, which started 5 or so months before this comic. I would assume there was some crossover in terms of editorial direction on both of these works. I mean, there kind of had to be. Speaking of which, Dan Castellaneta voiced Jim in the cartoon, who you may know as Homer Simpson, among other voices. But really, this was well written enough for what it was. It kept a wild pace. The characters acted about as close as you might imagine these characters to act. They bring up the Queen Slug for a butt and Princess What's-Her-Name were sisters. I didn't know that. It actually was kind of funny. Seeing more of the princess and her being such a strong presence was also nice to see. It, of course, ended the way many of Jim's sight gags do, with falling cows, especially the ending of the first game, when I believe they land on the princess. They also make one joke I wanted to point out, where Peter Puppy is playing what is clearly a Game Boy, though it says Sega on it, and comments that in the video game of Earthworm Jim, he doesn't wear any clothes. Peter doesn't, which he thinks is gross, and here he's wearing like a flannel shirt. On the art, as far as that goes, I'll go over my minor gripes first, which is mostly involved in the coloring. There were a few moments, not at all a lot, where they had colors on top of colors that didn't work. Like for a few pages, there were a narration box that had an orange background with like a green type, and you could barely read it. Happened in a few other panels where the backgrounds just didn't really work. Besides that, it was good for what it was. It worked exactly as well as it should have, and felt perfect for the frantic, odd nature of the story. Everyone was on model, and honestly, Jim and the Princess had lots of detail to them. Once again, these characters looked a little more like they did in the cartoons than in the game. The game had a slightly darker tone, more morbid and off-putting. Well, these were more kid-friendly, which isn't a bad thing. It just is what it is. The covers as well gave us some real fun references, James Bond and old comics, etc. This was the kind of work this type of IP needed at the time. Overall, I mean, it was fun, and I can't say too much more than that. I'm an Earthworm Jim fan, and this hit a sweet spot for me. It did give me some sense of nostalgia, and that's exactly what I was looking for. I had no idea Marvel published an Earthworm Jim comic, and I would have absolutely read it at the time. I'd have had all 3 issues back to back to back. But if you are a fan of Earthworm Jim, they're exactly more of the same. I won't compare this to any new comics, as they're kind of night and day. The new, the ones that Doug Tenenbaum put out. The newer ones are more of an extension of the game, a little more gritty, a little more psychedelic, less just random kids cartoon madness. But yeah, a fun, quick romp. It was only 3 issues, so. Well, that was Earthworm Jim. Do you have a game from the now defunct Shiny Entertainment that you like? I was actually a big fan of not only the Jim series, but MDK. And I was actually a big fan of Wild Nile when I was a kid. Does anyone remember that game? Let me know down below and all that. But all right, that's the end of Nostalgia Month. I was happy to look back at some of these things, and not so happy with others. Next month, I am not traveling, well, at all from the mid-90s, when in February I look at the entirety of Scud, the Disposable Assassin. This has been your new god, Daytona Micaiah. Thank you, everyone. I love you, and goodbye.